Hi guys, this is a very short version. I'm going to do the best I can here without stuff that I have here at school, at home. Let me explain a little bit here of the feminism and then the anti-feminism movement that we see during the 1970s. So remember, the rest of these notes that you can kind of click through, we talked about the LGBTQ movement, right? Gay rights movement takes form at Stonewall. We talked about the Chicano movement with Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers and the grapes boycott. So this is kind of part of a bigger push for civil rights. The American Indian movement picks up in the 1970s as well. So this is kind of going along with that. And what we're really seeing here is something that kind of had its roots in earlier in the 1950s and 60s. So Betty Friedan wrote the book called The Feminine Mystique. And you might remember that way back from, I think, chapter 36, where she interviewed a lot of women who were at stay-at-home housewives during the 1950s and wrote a book kind of compiling all the data that she got about how a lot of them did feel unfulfilled. And remember, I even said, no disrespect to stay-at-home moms. By the way, that is a hard job. That is a often very thankless job. It's a lot of work. It's very exhausting. But what we did kind of say is with World War II, we had Rosie the Riveter, right? We had women playing such a big role. And then right after World War II, we saw women go back into the home with no other option. I think that was the thing. Very few options, we should say. And the options that women had were very limited, right? Like there's this thing called the glass ceiling, where it's kind of this limit to where you could rise in a company. And so the only opportunities really available for women were jobs that were seen as feminine. So nursing and teaching were jobs that were seen as feminine. And then also secretarial work. And that was it. That was it, right? So we're starting to hear some voices saying, hey, you know what? Women need to have other options. Why shouldn't they have other options, right? Okay, so Title IX is part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and Title IX is something that we're going to see kind of expand in the 1970s. And what it does is it prevents gender discrimination in any shape or form. So the way we typically see this mostly in your lives in schools tends to be with sports. So for every sport that's like, let's talk about fall sports, right? Every sport that is a traditionally male sport, you have to offer a traditionally female sport. So you have an equal opportunity. That's what it's all about, equal opportunity. Okay, so football, typically a male sport. Although I will say, when I was in high school, North Olmsted had a female kicker. And by the way, she was really good. So it's not, you can play football if you want to, ladies, but it tends to be mostly male and it's listed as a boys' varsity sport. So that's why volleyball is in the fall. Okay, see, we're in compliance with Title IX. We've got an equal opportunity. So without Title IX, you guys, honestly, without Title IX, we'd really only have the sports that bring in money, which is boys football and boys basketball. Like maybe you could make the argument for soccer or track, maybe lacrosse, which is relatively new in this part of the country. We just got maybe 10 years ago, but even a lot of boys sports would probably be cut because school districts would get to the point where it just was too expensive to pay for the program and the equipment and the coaching, and they would cut them. So, my brother was a boys cross country runner. I liked going to those meets. Shout out to all the cross country people in the house. Like, they're fun. Okay, I like that. But I wouldn't say that they got a huge crowd. And I also wouldn't say that they brought in a ton of money. So that would be something that could potentially be cut. And there really probably wouldn't be any girl sports except ones that brought in money. You can see why schools would have to make tough decisions if their budget was cut. So as a former girls softball player, I'm very glad Title IX is there. Title IX, if that didn't exist, I never would have had the chance to play sports. Never. So it is necessary, right? But where we get some issues is sometimes it's abused. And here's an example, okay? When I was at Miami University for an undergrad, my undergraduate degree, they were in violation of Title IX, and they needed to add another women's sport. But they were concerned about money, and this happens in a lot of places. And they're concerned about money, and rather than add another women's sport, they cut men's tennis. So that's not cool, right? That's not the point. That's not what Title IX is supposed to do. Title IX isn't supposed to, again, hurt other people in the process of helping those, right? The whole goal of Title IX is to have equal opportunity. But sometimes schools are like, well, you know what? It's a lot cheaper and easier if we just cut the programs, and hey, then we're in compliance. So you can see how there's going to be some issues here. So the Equal Rights Amendment. Oh, this is fascinating. I'm going to have you guys watch a little video too. But the Equal Rights Amendment is first proposed by Alice Paul. Remember Alice Paul, girl that was force-fed way back in the suffrage movement. Remember her? And it was going to get rid of all discrimination by gender in the Constitution. It was going to be an amendment. The Constitution, as long as it is, the word gender's in there once. and it's in the 19th Amendment. That's it. So this was going to go after, equal pay. I think just this week actually was Equal Pay Day, the day that women have to work to additionally after New Year's Eve to catch up to the equal pay of a male in the previous year. Do you see what I'm saying? So it was going after that. And so it wasn't ratified because it got through, look at this, it got through all of these states, but you need 3/4 of the states to ratify the ERA. And these states didn't. Now I will say, since this map was printed, Illinois did. So what started to happen, because they put a deadline on it of 1982, and it expired. So I think there's 35, 36 states that ratified it initially, and then it expired. So what is starting to happen now with the Me Too movement has really revitalized the ERA, actually, and we've seen some states ratify it since this. So the big question is, well, what if we get 3/4? Does it become a law, or do we have to start all over again, right? Because we've passed that deadline. So yeah, so I'm gonna have this posted, but this is pretty cool. Come on, computer, you gonna work for me? Here we go. Yeah, 40 years later. So this is pretty recent. You can see January 2019. And my computer is really slow. I'm sorry. Anyway, you get the point. I'm gonna have you guys watch this because I think it's worth it. So you'll see sort of the background behind the ERA and how and kind of why now it's being revitalized. And people are talking about maybe adding it to the Constitution. So maybe it will be our next amendment. Who knows? Who knows? Okay. Going back here, the Warren Court era, this is actually a Burger Court decision, but the Warren Court era is, remember, an expansion of civil liberties. And so Roe versus Wade, it allowed abortion to be legalized under the 14th Amendment, which they talked about in that decision, an implied right to privacy. So now there were, of course, limits on this. It was in the first trimester, right? It was when the baby had to not be viable. So it was actually, without getting into all the biological details here, but the baby had to be able to not live outside the womb. That was the key. So what we've seen happen since 1973 is our medicine has advanced quite a bit, right? And babies can live outside the womb a lot earlier. Preemie babies have a much better chance of survival. So now this is a real gray area, right? And I don't have to tell you guys, I'm sure this is one that has strong feelings, usually one way or the other. Very few people I know are lukewarm on abortion rights. You either feel very passionately for or very passionately against. And I think what it comes down to here is we've got this whole idea of where do the rights of that unborn child begin, and there's very different definitions of when those rights begin. And when should those rights not be quote unquote counted, and the women's rights should be counted. Do you see what I'm saying? So it is a very gray area. We have not solved this really. There's going to be other cases you'll learn about in government, Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992. So, and you guys know this is a very hotly debated topic even today. But it kind of goes along with this whole idea of the women's rights movement here. Now, Richard Nixon, remember, he'll do anything for votes. He'll do anything for votes. And there was actually a bill that would have provided public daycare centers. So federally, almost like a Head Start, but daycare. And he vetoed it on the advice of Pat Buchanan, who is still around, a very conservative, very, very conservative guy, who's run for president several times. And Pat Buchanan said it would, quote, weaken the American family. So that does imply that having a woman work outside of the home weakens her family, right? Like you can see that in there. So you can kind of see why this is even a little bit of a hot button issue today. And it's really, I think it's about options. And I think that's what women are saying in the 70s is we should have equal opportunity. So there are Miss America protests. They were dressing up pigs and lambs in 1968 to protest the Miss American pageant. And we had the National Organization of Women formed. So there's a lot of groups that are being formed pushing for equality for gender, for sex. Now we also had the anti-feminist movement. This is Phyllis Schlafly. She is, full disclosure, not my favorite. When you can see, here's a quote that she says, "The best way to improve economic prospects for women is to improve job prospects for the men in their lives, even if that means increasing the so-called pay gap." Yeah, I might have to agree to disagree with you, Phyllis. Yeah, I'm not down with that. But so she was against the ERA, and it's important to note, you guys, this was, remember way back when we were talking about the 19th Amendment. There were a lot of women who were against the 19th Amendment. who said, no, we shouldn't vote. That's not our role, right? And so I think we still hear some of this today, that even within the women's rights movement, there's different ideas of what women should and should not be able to do. So yeah, so I don't know that it's something that has been completely settled. I think the Me Too movement that you guys are witnessing has brought up a lot of these things, and definitely brought up the desire for the ERA. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get 38 states to ratify that ERA, and then it's going to be, well, wait a second, like, what do we do? We've never had this happen where it takes 100 years to get to 3/4 of the states. So it would be an interesting constitutional question. I honestly don't know what would happen. Like, would they add it, or would they say, well, too late? You know, we put an expiration of 1982 and you can't do it. I don't know. So, but Ohio ratified it. Yay us. So this is a bigger part of the 1970s, and hopefully you can kind of understand how the desire for gender equality was rooted in a lot of movements before, and really goes all the way back to, I mean, really 1848 Seneca Falls is when we saw the first kind of major gathering of women. And remember Abigail Adams, remember the ladies' letter, you guys. This is a long time coming, and we're not done yet. All right? So I will leave you with that.